"Sir, is there anyone else at your house?" The window cleaner's voice was so low, I almost couldn't hear him over the traffic. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. "No, my son's out of town and I'm nearly an hour away. Why?" There was a pause. Then he said, "I keep hearing someone crying in your garage." For a second, I thought I had misunderstood him. "My garage?" "Yes, sir, quiet crying. It stops whenever I get close." I told myself it had to be a television, an injured animal, or sound carrying from another yard. Anything made more sense than a person crying inside a locked garage that no one was supposed to enter. But then I remembered the one rule my son Tyler had insisted on for months. Never go inside the garage. He claimed he was building something special in there, a woodworking project he wanted to finish without interference. I had trusted him so completely that I never even asked to see it. Now a stranger standing in my backyard was questioning what I had refused to question in my own home. "Stay away from the door," I said. "I'm coming back." I canceled my errands and turned the car around. Tyler had left town that morning for what he called a business trip. Before leaving, he had reminded me not to let anyone into the garage because his equipment was expensive. At the time, I had laughed. Now that warning felt different. I called the cleaner back as I merged onto the highway. "What exactly did you hear?" "A woman, I think," he said. "It's faint, like she's trying not to be heard." My stomach tightened. "Did you see anyone enter?" "No, sir. The side door is locked. The windows are covered from inside." That detail sent a chill through me. Tyler had told me the coverings protected unfinished furniture from sunlight. I had accepted that explanation the same way I accepted everything he said. For 3 months, he had become unusually protective of that building. He carried meals outside late at night, claiming he lost track of time while working. He discouraged me from inviting neighbors over because he said the noise disturbed his concentration. Once I heard a heavy thud after midnight. Tyler told me a shelf had collapsed. I believed him. My phone rang again before I reached the next exit. It was the cleaner. This time he was whispering. "Sir," I moved closer to the wall. "What happened?" I heard her clearly. My pulse hammered in my ears. "What did she say?" He took one shaky breath. "She said, 'Please help me.'" I pressed harder on the accelerator. "Call 911, I said. "I'm almost home." The 25-minute drive home felt longer than any trip I had ever taken. Every traffic light seemed to last forever. Every slow-moving car became another obstacle between me and whatever was happening inside my own garage. My mind kept replaying Tyler's face from that morning. He had loaded a suitcase into his SUV, smiled, and said, "Don't forget, Dad, stay out of the garage. I'm almost finished with your surprise." I had smiled back. I wouldn't dream of ruining it. At the time, it felt like an ordinary exchange between a father and his son. Now, every word sounded rehearsed. The cleaner stayed on the phone with me for several minutes before hanging up to meet the arriving officers. When I finally turned onto my street, flashing blue and red lights reflected off every parked car. 3 police cruisers blocked part of the road. My quiet neighborhood had become the center of attention. I pulled into the driveway so quickly I barely remembered putting the car in park. A uniformed officer met me before I reached the front yard. "Mr. Mercer." "Yes, I'm Officer Reynolds," he held out a hand. "We received a report of possible distress coming from your detached garage." "I own the house," I said, already pulling my keys from my pocket. "Do whatever you have to do." Before taking them, he asked, "Is anyone supposed to be inside?" "No, my son. He's out of town." "You've checked. He left this morning." Officer Reynolds nodded but studied my face carefully as though trying to determine whether I was hiding something. "I understand," he said. "We'll verify everything." The window cleaner walked toward me from the side of the house. His hands were still trembling. "I'm sorry if I overreacted, sir." "You didn't. "What exactly did you hear?" Officer Reynolds asked him. The cleaner swallowed, at first, just quiet crying. He pointed toward the garage. "It stopped." "When did it start again?" "Every few minutes." "Did you hear words?" He hesitated. "I wasn't sure the first few times." He looked at me apologetically. "But the last time," his voice almost disappeared. "She asked for help." No one spoke. The silence itself felt frightening. Another officer walked slowly toward the detached garage while everyone watched. He knocked firmly. "Police department." Nothing. He knocked again. "If anyone is inside, answer the door." Still nothing. Officer Reynolds looked back toward us. It could be an empty building. I wanted to believe him. Maybe the cleaner had misheard something. Maybe stress was making all of us imagine things. Then a faint sound drifted through the afternoon air. It was so quiet that I almost questioned whether I had imagined it, but everyone else froze at exactly the same moment. Another officer raised his hand for silence. There it was again, not loud, not screaming, just soft, steady, crying. Every hair on my arm stood up. The cleaner slowly whispered, "That's what I've been hearing." My knees suddenly felt weak. For months, Tyler had told me that garage contained nothing but woodworking tools. For months, I had believed him without asking a single question. Officer Reynolds turned toward me. "Mr. Mercer." I already knew what he was going to ask. "If we can't make contact," he said carefully, "we'll need your authorization to force entry." I didn't hesitate. "Do it." He handed me a simple consent form. My signature barely resembled my handwriting. Another officer retrieved a heavy breaching tool from the patrol vehicle. Two more officers positioned themselves on either side of the garage door. One counted quietly. "Ready?" The others nodded. Before the first strike landed, bang, something slammed hard against the inside wall. Everyone instinctively stepped back. The sound echoed through the yard. For one terrifying second, it felt as though whoever, or whatever, was inside had finally realized we were outside. Officer Reynolds immediately drew his weapon. "Police, step away from the door." No answer came, only absolute silence. The pounding had stopped as suddenly as it had begun. No crying, no movement, nothing. Every officer exchanged uneasy glances. Whatever was waiting on the other side of that door was now waiting for us. The lead officer gave one final warning. "Police, if anyone is inside, we're coming in." No voice answered, no footsteps. Only the suffocating silence that followed the pounding from inside. Officer Reynolds nodded once. "Go." The steel breaching tool crashed into the side entry door. The first hit splintered the frame. The second tore the deadbolt loose. On the third strike, the door swung inward. Two officers entered immediately with weapons raised. "Police, show us your hands." I took one step forward before another officer stopped me. "You stay back, Mr. Mercer." I obeyed, but every instinct pushed me toward that garage. Within seconds, neighbors began appearing outside their homes. Curtains moved. Front doors opened. People gathered along the sidewalks, staring at the police cars lining my driveway. Whispers spread from one person to another. "What happened? Is Daniel okay? Why are they searching his garage?" The attention made my stomach sink. I had lived on that street for nearly 30 years. Now every familiar face was looking at my property as if it had become the scene of something unimaginable. Inside the garage, officers moved boxes and equipment aside. One of them called out, "There's another wall back here." Officer Reynolds immediately hurried inside. From where I stood, I could see shelves packed with paint cans and toolboxes being rolled away. Behind them was something I had never known existed. A section of the garage had been professionally enclosed. Fresh drywall blended almost perfectly with the original walls. Without moving the shelving units, no one would ever have noticed it. One officer examined the hidden door. "It's reinforced." Another replied, "This wasn't thrown together." The realization struck me harder than anything else had. This room hadn't been built overnight. It had taken planning that happened on my property without me ever noticing. The officers forced open the concealed door. For several seconds, no one outside could see what was happening. Then one officer shouted, "Medic, now!" Two paramedics rushed past me carrying emergency bags. Another officer emerged only long enough to wave them inside. My heart pounded so violently I could barely breathe. "What is it?" I asked. No one answered. More neighbors had gathered across the street. Someone began recording with a cell phone. Another whispered loud enough for me to hear, "I can't believe this was happening here." The words hit me like a punch. They weren't talking about Tyler. They were talking about my house, my name, my address. Everything I had spent decades building suddenly felt like it was collapsing in front of the entire neighborhood. Several minutes later, the paramedics carefully guided a young woman out of the hidden room. She looked exhausted. Her face was pale. A blanket covered her shoulders. She shielded her eyes from the afternoon sunlight as though she hadn't seen daylight in far too long. I stood frozen. This wasn't an intruder. This wasn't someone hiding from another crime. Someone had been kept inside my garage. One of the paramedics helped her toward the ambulance. As they passed me, she slowed. Our eyes met for the first time. She studied my face for a long second before speaking in a voice barely above a whisper. "I know." She paused to catch her breath. "You didn't know." I couldn't answer. The only thing I managed was a slow shake of my head as tears blurred my vision. The ambulance doors closed. The siren remained silent as the medical team continued treating her inside. Officer Reynolds walked back toward the concealed room. A detective had just arrived and was carefully photographing everything inside. Moments later, another investigator stepped out carrying a black notebook sealed inside an evidence bag. He frowned as he flipped carefully through its pages. Then he looked directly at Officer Reynolds. "You need to see this." "What is it?" The detective held up the notebook. "It looks like someone documented every single day she was in that room." Everyone around him fell silent. Who would keep a record like that? And why would Tyler leave it behind? The notebook lay open on the folding table detectives had set up in my driveway. No one spoke for several seconds. An investigator wearing blue gloves carefully turned another page. "There are dates," he said. Another detective leaned closer. "And times." Officer Reynolds looked over his shoulder. "What kind of times?" The detective pointed to several handwritten entries. "Breakfast, lunch, dinner." He flipped another page. "Bathroom breaks." Another. "When your father leaves." Then another. "When your father comes home." My heart stopped. "What?" The detective slowly looked at me. "Mr. Mercer." He chose his words carefully. "Whoever wrote this planned everything around your daily routine." I stared at the notebook. Every page was filled with neat handwriting. Every entry showed the same level of precision. Monday, Daniel leaves at 9:10 a.m. Tuesday, Daniel grocery shopping. Wednesday, Daniel meets Harold for breakfast. Friday, Daniel at hardware store. My entire retirement schedule had become someone else's operating manual. Officer Reynolds quietly closed the notebook. "This wasn't impulsive." "No," the detective agreed. "This took months." I sat down on the back step because my legs suddenly refused to hold me. For months, Tyler had known exactly where I would be, exactly when I would return, exactly how long he had before I came home, and I had unknowingly made his planning easier simply by living my normal life. Another detective approached carrying a tablet. "We've started pulling his phone records." "What have you found?" Officer Reynolds asked. "He told multiple people his girlfriend disappeared months ago." I looked up. "Disappeared?" The detective nodded. "He claimed she left him unexpectedly." Another officer joined the conversation. "Same story to everyone." He looked through several printed messages. "He told one friend she moved to another state, another that she checked herself into a mental health facility, and another that she wanted no contact." Each lie had been slightly different, just believable enough, just consistent enough, long enough that no one kept asking questions. Officer Reynolds sighed. He was creating explanations before anyone even started looking. By evening, investigators had obtained search warrants for Tyler's apartment and his vehicle. I watched officers drive away while crime scene technicians continued photographing every inch of the garage. Television crews arrived before sunset. Their cameras pointed toward my house while reporters spoke quietly into microphones. Across the street, neighbors gathered in small groups. Some looked concerned, others looked confused. A few couldn't stop staring at me. One man I'd known for over 20 years finally walked over. "Daniel," he hesitated. "I have to ask." I nodded. "I understand." "You really didn't know?" The question hurt, not because he asked it, but because I realized everyone else was wondering the same thing. "I swear to you," I answered. "I thought he was building furniture." He studied my face for several seconds before quietly squeezing my shoulder. "I believe you. Not everyone did." The detectives continued interviewing me late into the evening. I gave them every password they requested, every security code, every receipt, every calendar entry, years of financial records, anything that might help. I had nothing to hide. And I wanted them to know it. As the hours passed, their questions slowly changed. Instead of treating me like someone who might be involved, they began treating me like someone whose trust had been exploited. Near midnight, one detective returned from Tyler's apartment. "We found photographs." My stomach tight. Photographs. They confirmed she repeatedly tried to leave him. He placed a folder on the table. "There are damaged phones, torn luggage, and messages she never got to send." Officer Reynolds looked at him. "So she wasn't missing voluntarily?" "No," the detective shook his head, "not even close." The following afternoon my phone rang. "Officer Reynolds, we've located Tyler." I closed my eyes. "Where?" "He landed at the airport about 30 minutes ago." "What happened?" "We arrested him before he reached the parking garage." I didn't know what to feel: relief, anger, disbelief, maybe all three. "Did he resist?" "No." The officer paused. "He acted like he had no idea why we were there." Several hours later, I arrived at the police station after detectives asked me to identify a few items recovered from the garage. Through the observation window, I could see Tyler sitting calmly inside the interview room. He looked exactly like my son. The same posture, the same expression, the same person I had trusted without hesitation. Officer Reynolds stood beside me. "We're about to begin questioning." I nodded slowly. "Before you do." He looked at me. "I'd like 1 minute. 1 minute. I just want to ask him one question." The detective considered it before opening the interview room door. Tyler looked up as I entered. "Dad," he started to smile. Before another word could leave his mouth, Detective Reynolds walked in behind me and silently placed the black notebook on the table directly in front of Tyler. The smile disappeared from my son's face. Tyler stared at the notebook without touching it. For the first time since I'd seen him through the observation window, he looked uncertain. Detective Reynolds pulled out the chair across from him. "Recognize it?" Tyler remained silent. The detective opened the notebook to the first page. "Your handwriting matches notes we recovered from your apartment." Still nothing. He turned another page. "Every meal." Another page. "Every time your father left the house." Another. "Every time he came home." The detective closed the notebook. "You planned this for months." Tyler finally looked at me. "Dad." I raised my hand. "No." He stopped speaking. I had spent 33 years believing I knew my son better than anyone else. At that moment, I realized I hadn't known him at all. Detective Reynolds leaned forward. "The evidence is overwhelming." He placed several photographs beside the notebook. The hidden room. The reinforced door. The disabled security cameras. The text messages. The victim's statement. He let the silence settle. "This is your opportunity to tell the truth." Tyler lowered his head. When he finally spoke, his voice was flat. "She wouldn't leave me." I felt every muscle in my body tense. Detective Reynolds didn't interrupt. Tyler continued. "I loved her." The detective calmly replied, "Love doesn't involve locking someone in a room." Tyler shook his head. "You don't understand." "No," the detective answered. "Help us understand." Tyler stared at the tabletop for several seconds. "When she broke up with me, she said I was controlling." He laughed bitterly. "She was making a mistake. So you locked her away." "I was protecting her." The words made my stomach turn. He actually believed them. I couldn't let her ruin her life. I looked at the man sitting across the table. He looked like my son. He sounded like a stranger. Every excuse he offered became another admission. He explained how he had convinced himself she would eventually forgive him. How he had built the insulated room behind the shelving units over several weekends while I visited friends or ran errands. How he carefully memorized my retirement schedule until he knew exactly when I would be gone. How he deliberately asked me never to enter the garage because he knew I trusted him enough not to question it. Then he looked at me again. "I never wanted to hurt you, Dad." Those words hurt more than anything else he had said. "You already did." My voice barely rose above a whisper. "You used my home. You used my trust. You turned everything I believed about family into a weapon." He lowered his eyes. There was nothing else to say. The interview ended shortly afterward. Over the following weeks, detectives gathered additional evidence from Tyler's apartment, his phone, and his computer. Every piece matched the young woman's account. The notebook wasn't exaggeration. It was documentation, a record of months of calculated planning. When the case finally went to court, I testified. So did the window cleaner. So did the responding officers. The young woman testified with remarkable courage. She described how Tyler repeatedly told her no one would ever look inside my garage because everyone respected me. He said his father trusted him completely. Hearing those words spoken aloud in a courtroom was almost unbearable. The jury didn't deliberate for long. Tyler was convicted on multiple felony charges related to kidnapping, unlawful imprisonment, and other offenses supported by the evidence. He was taken directly into custody. I watched without saying a word. The legal process also cleared me completely. Investigators publicly confirmed that I had no knowledge of the hidden room, had immediately authorized police to enter my property, and had cooperated fully from the moment the window cleaner called. That statement mattered. For weeks after the rescue, some neighbors had quietly wondered whether I had known more than I admitted. Once the investigation was complete, those doubts disappeared. Many of the same neighbors who had watched police surround my house later stopped by simply to check on me. One afternoon, Mrs. Henderson from across the street brought over a homemade pie. "I owe you an apology," she said. "I had questions." "I understand," I replied. "I would have had them too." The garage remained sealed until investigators finished processing every inch of it. After they released the property, I hired contractors to tear out the hidden room completely. When the walls came down, I stood outside and watched every piece of it hauled away. I never wanted another person to stand inside that space again. The garage was rebuilt as a simple workshop with open walls, bright windows, and nothing hidden behind them. Months later, I met the window cleaner for coffee. He admitted he almost ignored the crying because he worried about embarrassing himself if he was wrong. "I'm glad you didn't," I told him. "You saved her life." He shook his head. "I just made a phone call." "No," I said. "You listened when everyone else would have explained it away." That conversation stayed with me. I eventually began volunteering with organizations that educate communities about recognizing signs of coercive control and why unusual sounds, repeated cries for help, or unexplained isolation should never be dismissed without concern. People often ask me what the hardest part of the entire experience was. It wasn't standing in court. It wasn't seeing the hidden room. It wasn't even realizing how completely my trust had been manipulated. The hardest part was accepting that loving someone doesn't exempt them from accountability. Trust is important, but trust without awareness can be exploited by the very people we believe would never betray us. I no longer speak to Tyler. That relationship ended the day I learned what he had done inside my home. I still grieve the son I thought I had, but I refuse to excuse the man he chose to become. If there's one lesson I carry with me every day, it's this. Sometimes the person who saves a life isn't the strongest one in the story. It's simply the one who refuses to ignore a quiet cry for help.